Data shows inflation is not transitory. Whoops. Organized crime is contributing to inflation rising higher. California court deals a lethal blow to the iMob's criminal business model. All right, we start with the story of the hour, the story of the day, the story of the week, the story of the month, the story of the year. Inflazione. And of course, inflation, according to the Fed, comes in many shapes and forms. It started as, where is inflation? Is it over here? Is it over there? The invisible form of inflation. And then inflation started to evolve like a Pokemon. It started with invisible, and it evolved into its here, to its transitory, to its largely transitory, and now we're at the stage of, holy shit, we f***ed up. And perhaps inflation is not transitory after all, evident by the PPI report, the Producer Price Index, that we got on Friday. The headline reads, PPI inflation hotter in August, up 8.3% year over year and up 0.7% month over month. And when we look at the different categories in the PPI report for the final demand, let's see where inflation is rising higher, significantly higher. How about food? You know, who needs food, right? Every time the Fed, the CNBCs, the Wall Streeters, and the likes talk about inflation, they say X food and energy. How about X oxygen too? As if food and energy not important at all. Food and energy perhaps one of the biggest expenses for the average consumer. And now we have fresh and dry vegetables, for example. The inflation month over month. This is what I look at. This is what matters to me. I don't care about year over year because the Fed says it's transitory due to the base effects, meaning the economy was in quote-unquote depression last year due to the pandemic. And of course, inflation readings this year will be much hotter than last year when we were in depression. But what about month to month? If inflation is rising month over month, then forget about transitory. Forget about base effects. When we look at fresh and dry vegetables, for example, the inflation is up 16% month over month. What about grains? The inflation is 6.4% month over month. Okay, so we're not going to eat fresh and dry vegetables. We're not going to eat grains. What else? How about beef and veal? You like beef? Well, it's up 14.7% month over month. How about pork? 3.8% month over month. How about chickens and turkeys? For chickens, 6% month over month. For turkeys, 4.7% month over month. How about donkeys? Because these are too expensive. But rest assured, the Fed has a plan for you. If you cannot eat food, how about you eat home heating oil? Because that was down 4.2%. Let them eat heating oil, the bums. But before you celebrate, look at energy prices. Residential natural gas, for example, up 5.6% month over month. This is the new one. Natural gas prices are rising significantly higher, doubled the pre-pandemic levels. We use natural gas all over the place. So again, Mr. Powell, you say this is transitory. I say transitory my ass. How about home electronic equipment? You know, because we have the deflationistas. Say, what about TVs, bro? The TVs, like Kramer, right? TVs. The TVs are deflationary. Well, here comes home electronic equipment, up 3.1% month over month. What about health and beauty? Up 7.8% month over month. Now, thank God, I'm naturally healthy and beautiful, and therefore I have no need at all, for health and beauty products. And here it is, TVs, the TVs. Well, they're up 3.9% month over month. What about hardware? Building materials and supplies. This is lumber. Oops, down 11.6%. Yay! Inflation is transitory, you see? Everything else is rising higher, but lumber is down. Can't you bums be thankful for anything that we do to you? Why do you have to complain all the time? It's inflation. Buck up. Pay more. Who cares? And then we have airlines passenger services. And these were up 8.9% months over months. And by the way, did you take a look at your latest cable and internet bills? Because these are going higher too. You might want to check, by the way, and not just have the auto payment. Because, hey, what happened here? They're taking an extra $50 a month. What's going on? Here's what's going on. They're raising prices. Bundled wired telecommunication access services are up 4.7% month over month. Why, you might ask? The answer is why not? Everything is rising higher. Prices are going higher across the board. And the consumer for now is not complaining and the consumer is paying. Why? Because they have the stimmies and the stock market gains. Check out my Robinhood gains, bro. I can afford beef. And if my portfolio crashes and goes down to zero, at least I'll be able to afford beef as an NFT. That invisible meat tastes delicious. And by the way, there is no end to this inflation. There's no end in sight at all. U.S. wholesale inventory accumulation slowed in July, lagging further behind sales. And it is now taking wholesalers the shortest time in 7 years to clean shelves. What does that mean? It means that the demand is hot, 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 but the supply is nowhere to be found. The Fed and Jerome Powell say, well, these are transitory supply chain bottlenecks, and they will be solved and resolved in time. How long do we have to wait, Mr. Powell? Because you yourself say that by transitory, we don't mean that prices will go down. Prices will stay higher. But the pace of the increase in prices will slow down. That's helpful. Now, you see, the only way to stop this monster called inflation is to slow down the demand, because it's not a matter of supply chain bottlenecks and for the supply chain to catch up with the demand. We have Delta, COVID, etc., the labor shortages, all contributing to the supply chain bottleneck and supply chain shortages. And these shortages are projected to outlast all expectations beyond 2022. So the only remedy right now is to slow down demand. How do you do that? By tightening the monetary policy, by printing less money. What does that mean? It means no stimmies. Oh, and by the way, the stock market will crash. Real estate values will crash. And perhaps when the equities market crashes, companies will fire people. A lot of people will be unemployed and the demand will go down. The supply will naturally catch up with the demand, the non-existent demand at that point. And therefore, we've been beating on the drum over and over and over again. Mr. Powell, the Federal Reserve, you gotta start tapering now, because the longer you wait, the harsher the medicine will be, the harsher the approach will be, and the bigger the consequences will be on the stock market, the real estate market, and the economy overall. And your so-called remedy to recover employment in the country will fire back and cause unemployment. But do you think Powell, Kashkari, Williams, any Fed zombie out there, you think they really understand what I just said? Or are they just busy playing golf with their buddies from Goldman Sachs and BlackRock? Now, on top of the reckless monetary policy contributing to inflation rising higher, the supply bottlenecks contributing to inflation rising higher, we have a demand pull and a supply push inflation, the perfect storm. On top of that, we have wage inflation, which is good. It's good for us, the bum class, the working class. But hold your horses before you start celebrating too early, because for every dollar you're going to make extra in wages, they're going to charge you for rent, food, and living expenses, meaning it doesn't matter whether your wages are going to go higher or not, because your purchasing power have been reduced dramatically and your standard of living also has been reduced dramatically. The Atlanta Fed revising their wage inflation projection, and they're revising it higher to a 13-year high. Matter of fact, the Atlanta Fed pretty much gave up on GDP forecasting. They said, you know what, we're going to stop forecasting GDP because we have revised the GDP down from over 5% down to 3.1%, but they're revising wages higher. Again, what does that mean? Wages higher, GDP down. This is exactly what stagflation means. And remember, Amazon, the Fed, and their allies, the deflation crowd, continue to say that we have strong deflationary forces from China to tech to TVs to Amazon, because Amazon underpriced their products and therefore they cause inflation to go down. But you might want to pull your head out of your ass here and realize that these days are over. Amazon has already defeated the competition. Amazon has already destroyed every small business in the country. They no longer need to underprice their products. On top of that, Amazon is raising wages higher. Therefore, Amazon changes from a deflationary force to an inflationary force. And now they're offering to cover 100% of college tuition for U.S. hourly employees. Now remember, inflation all in all is bad in the long term, but there are good sides of inflation. There are good gains, and this is one example. But don't kid yourself here. This will contribute to inflation to rise higher and higher and higher. Because next thing you know, if I'm a worker, I'm looking at Amazon, Walmart, Target, and perhaps a small business, the liquor store down the street. Amazon is going to pay me $15 an hour plus 100% in college tuition. Walmart says, forget about Amazon. We'll pay you $16 an hour plus college tuition. Target says, forget about both of them. I'll pay you $18 an hour plus college tuitions plus credit for booze and weed that you need to go throughout college. Now, where does that leave the small business? I tell you where. In the dust. Small businesses will not be able to compete at all with the Amazons, the Walmarts, and the Targets of the world. Oh, and what about that transitory chip shortage, Mr. Powell? What's going on with that one? Now we have the news that the gap between ordering a chip and the delivery is still growing and now surpassing 20 weeks. You gotta wait 20 weeks to receive your chips. This will choke the supply, increase the competition, because the customers for these chips, they're going to start a bidding war. The wait time is already too long, over 20 weeks from order to delivery. And now we're about to see a bidding war between companies, which will drive chip prices higher. And they say that chips are the new oil. If chip prices go higher, pretty much everything we use, the prices will go higher. And these higher prices will be passed all the way down to us, the end customer. And the chairman of the Federal Reserve says, yeah, I know, prices will go higher. That's what I told you. Prices will go higher, and they're not going to go down. This is not what I mean by transitory. I just mean that at some point in the future, which I'm not sure when, inflation will slow down, meaning prices will not increase at the same pace. Duh, every inflation is transitory. But what about the damages, sweetie? The damages that will leave the poor and the middle class scarred with lower purchasing power, lower standards of living, and higher living expenses from rent to food to electronics, etc., etc., etc. Matter of fact, Toyota is now saying, forget about cars. We can't produce them. We gotta wait 20 weeks plus to get the chips. So they're cutting their forecast even more. They've already cut the forecast. Now they're cutting the forecast even more by over 300,000 cars. What does that mean? If the demand on cars continue, and it will continue so long as the Fed continues to print money out of thin air, well, there is a shortage of cars. Companies are not producing new cars. Where else are you going to go? The used cars market. So the prices of used cars will continue to rise higher and higher and higher. And every dip in used car prices will be transitory. That's the transitory, Mr. Powell. And I'm not sure if you heard the news, the commentary from 3M's CFO today. And he said, forget about transitory. Inflation is rising way beyond our estimates. And this chip shortage, by the way, it will last into 2022, perhaps beyond. We have company CEOs, CFOs warning over and over and over again. Folks, this is not transitory. We, corporate America, are not treating this as transitory. We're raising prices, suppliers are raising prices on us, and all of that cost is being passed down all the way to the end customer. Of course, you combine all of these dynamics of inflation, the reckless monetary policy, the supply chain shortages, the wage inflation, and we talked about the weird weather phenomenons, climate change, droughts, frosts, impacting crops across the world, causing shortages in food. We talked about the diseases in cows and pork, also contributing to inflation rising higher. We talked about rats invading plantations and eating the crops and ruining all the output, causing supply shortages in food and oils. We have factory fires. Earlier in the year, we had a fire in a factory in Japan, causing chip production to be delayed. And here's another one, the mob. Yep, organized crime.
You might know who we are, but we know who you are. You understand?
You know, he was one of the city's biggest hijackers of booze, cigarettes, razor blades, shrimp and lobsters. Shrimp and lobsters were best. They went really fast.
Thanks.
Is now contributing to inflation rising significantly higher. So to the Fed, Mr. Powell, we have all of these dynamics on top of your reckless monetary policy contributing to inflation rising higher. At least in the 70s, we had oil prices rising higher. Now we have everything rising higher. And we have every single factor working in synchrony to push inflation higher, including organized crime. You know, on Friday, I woke up in the morning and I checked my portfolio, my stock market account, and there was nothing wrong. It was pretty much normal. If anything, I was making fazulis. So I said today is gonna be a good day. But, as you might already know, I own the stock of Kroger, and it's a large position to say the least, but it was down 10% in the morning. Why? Because of earnings. So I checked the earnings, and the earnings were okay, no problem, beating on revenue, beating on earnings, their cash flow is increasing, no problems at all, but the margins were kind of icky. Now, we already know that grocery stores are a low margin business, but it works both ways, by the way, when it comes to inflation in grocery stores. On one hand, they have a pricing power, and they can pass the extra cost to the end customer, because what are you going to do? Not eat? You're not going to buy groceries? On the other hand, the labor wage inflation is a problem for Kroger and grocery stores in general, because if wages continue to rise higher, there are limitations of how much can be passed to the end customer. And when we talk about a low margin business, this is a double whammy. So why wasn't my portfolio down if the stock was down 10%? Well, the stock went parabolic, and therefore I have already bought put options, aka insurance. So again, my advice is put options are here for a reason. Use them, you dummies. My name is Joe Ben Biden, and I approve this massage. But still, I was baffled. Kroger is a good business. They have a good management. How come they missed on margins? What contributed to margins being way below expectations? And the answer came out to my shock when I watched the interview with CNBC. The CEO of Kroger was doing an interview with Sarah Eisen from CNBC. Eisen, no Berg, by the way. They forgot about the Berg part. You know, Grandpa didn't want people to know that we're Jewish, and he made it even more obvious. So my advice, next time leave the Berg, because that's where the flavor is. But Sarah Eisen did the interview with Kroger CEO Rodney McMillan, I believe, and this is what he said regarding the awful margins for Kroger.
Well, it looks like the problem, always good to have you, is the margin story. That's what investors are focusing on. You blamed on the conference call supply chain issues and shrink. Can you just expand on that? Explain why margins came in light?
Yeah, if you look at gross margin, about half of the decline in gross margin was driven by the pressure on the supply chain costs, and that's pretty common across all companies. And if you look at shrink, organized crime is certainly more prevalent today than it was a year or two ago.
Say what, senor?
Organized crime is certainly more prevalent today than it was a year or two ago, and those two things were about half. Now, on the flip side, we were incredibly proud of the cost controls and the OG&A reductions. So when you look at the two together, we actually had a very good balance between gross and operating OG&A and operating margins as well.
And of course, this is the part where Rodney is bullshitting. We had a lousy quarter. I'm just trying to put a lipstick on a pig.
So where does that go? Especially this issue about organized crime, which has impacted a number of successful retailers lately.
Yeah, we're actually working with other retailers and working with industry groups as well. I know the government is starting to focus more energy on it as well. We have a great partnership with the FBI and then local crime units.
Now, ask yourself a question. Don't you want this channel to be bigger than Meet Kevin? Because when I interview CEOs, you're not going to have any of that bullshit. It's going to be like an interrogation room. But perhaps this is the most important part of the interview. When the CEO of the largest grocery store chain in the country is asked, are you passing the extra cost from inflation down to the end customer or not?
One initial thought when looking at a margin miss was that you might be having trouble passing on higher prices from the raw materials inflation, the commodities inflation that we've seen across the board to consumers. What's happening there with the prices consumers are paying? How much are they going up and how much will that continue?
Yeah, if you look at within your question, obviously about 2/3 of our customers are concerned about increases in cost. For the most part, we're able to pass those costs through. And the places where we're not really is part of our strategy, where we continually offer a customer a better and better deal as we get process changes to be able to afford it. So overall, we're able to pass it through. We are starting to see a little bit higher inflation as we predicted and thought we would.
So there you go, pal. CEOs of companies are saying they're passing the extra cost of inflation down to us. And you have all of these dynamics, from wage inflation to supply chain bottlenecks to drought to frost to rats to the mob, all contributing to inflation rising higher and higher and higher. And speaking of the mob, let's talk about the iMob, Apple Incorporated.
Where's the fucking money?
I'll get the money!
I know you'll get the fucking money. But you know what you should get? A cork in your fucking mouth, because you tell people I'm nothing.
Now let me school you about the history of the iMob. There was this company called Apple, founded by Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, a visionary, innovator, kind of leader. But of course, the geniuses thought that he's of no use, and they fired him from his own company. Fast forward, we had Bill Gates starting Microsoft, and at that time, Apple was thought about as a joke company with garbage products, unreliable products, inferior to Microsoft, until Steve Jobs took back the company and he started innovating once again. And he gave us the iPad, the iPod, but most importantly, the legendary iPhone. And the assumption is, had Steve Jobs lived, he would have continued doing what he was doing, innovating, creating more products, newer products. But unfortunately, Steve Jobs died. And who took his place, by the way? The answer is Tim Apple. And Tim Apple was a good old boy when he took over. He was a supply chain guy, and he did what he had to do, fixing the supply chains, concentrating on the stock price, stashing more cash over at Ireland where the cash is not taxed, and using the fake money printed out of thin air from the Fed instead to initiate share buybacks, which is another form of stock market manipulation. But all in all, Tim Apple was successful with all the stock splits and buybacks to push Apple's stock higher and higher and higher. The problem arose when the market realized that Apple is a stagnant company and it ceased to innovate anymore. And now Apple's products are becoming inferior to the competition, losing market share across the globe. And indeed, Apple ceased to innovate anymore. No new inventions, no new tech, no tangible additions to the iPhone year over year. So Tim Apple thought of a brilliant idea of getting Apple into the mob business, a racketeering operation called the App Store, otherwise known as the services revenue for Apple. What is the services revenue, by the way, aka the shakedown business? Apple decided that after I buy the phone from Apple, paid cash, every transaction that I do using that phone, Apple will have to collect 30% cut from whatever company I'm conducting business with using my iPhone. This is called the shakedown revenue, aka the rent, 30%.
The rent.
You give us the rent or we crack your kneecaps. We ban you from the store, right? And app developers are complaining. Wait a minute here. We're doing business with the customer. They're buying services and products from us. Why do we have to share the revenue with the iMob? And as a customer, I say, I already paid cash for the phone. I don't owe Apple anything at all. Why does Apple entitled to a cut from any transaction I do with an individual business using my iPhone? What entitles them to that revenue? I already paid for the phone. I own the phone. If they're going to charge businesses a cut of the revenue, how come they're not cutting me in? You buy a house, you pay cash for it, you hire a gardener, but somehow the real estate company that sold you the house or the bank that sold you the house are now demanding a cut from the gardener. Why? It's already paid for. We owe you nothing. But the iMob, brilliantly so, figured out the racketeering business, the shakedown business, and it became its highest margin business, the highest growth business in Apple Incorporated. And the iMob desperately needs that revenue because we have a chip shortage and their hardware products are being delayed. They're not making money selling products and they depend on the services, aka shakedown revenue, more than ever. But the problem is, app developers, led by Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, decided to sue Apple. And on Friday, we got a ruling. The judge ruled in favor of Apple, by the way, pretty much on all counts, saying that Apple is not a monopoly and it shouldn't be punished for success. Success what, lady? The racketeering business? The shakedown business? That's success? How about innovating? But again, do not expect a fair ruling from a judge that owns Apple stock in her portfolio. But perhaps there was a lethal ruling here for the iMob. One count. And it changes everything. A U.S. judge issued a ruling in Fortnite creator Epic Games' antitrust lawsuit against Apple's App Store, striking down some of Apple's restrictions on how developers can collect payments in apps. The ruling says that Apple cannot bar developers from providing buttons or links in their apps that direct customers to other ways to pay outside of Apple's own in-app purchasing system, which charges developers commissions of up to 30%. The ruling also said that Apple cannot ban developers from communicating with customers via contact information that the developers obtained when customers signed up within the app. And right away, we saw video makers' stocks shooting up higher, along with app stocks, Airbnb, Bumble, Match.com, all shooting up higher because now they have an option to steer away your payment method. In the past, they couldn't even steer away your payment options. You had to pay using the App Store, a monopoly. And the iMob said, if you try to do funny business of steering the customer away from using the App Store to pay, we'll crack your kneecaps, we'll ban you from the store. And of course, after the ruling, which came in favor of Apple, by the way, the stock of Apple crashed by the tune of over 3%. And of course, the iMob tried to distract and steer away the negative attention from the stock by announcing that the iCar project is still alive. Hey folks, don't sell our stock. We still have the iCar, which we might and might not announce in our upcoming California streaming, whatever the hell it is, where we're going to announce new colors for the iPhone. Oh, and by the way, if you short our stock, we'll crack your kneecaps. We'll break a few teeth. We'll make you disappear. And I know what you're gonna say, but bro, Apple doesn't need that kind of stuff. The ruling is actually in favor of Apple, and that one count doesn't mean anything. And you might have heard the propagandists over at CNBC all day long defending Apple, pretending that this ruling is not a game changer. Matter of fact, spin it around and saying that this is actually good for Apple. Oh, really? When the shakedown business is shut down, pretty much, that's good for Apple? Apple just recorded a 42.5% gross margin for the quarter, the highest in 9 years. And this was, of course, earlier in the year. Where did the record margin come from? Here's the answer. Apple said the gross margin in its services business, aka the shakedown business, climbed to 70% in the quarter, from 65% a year earlier. Matter of fact, according to the court's papers, gaming apps account for approximately 70% of all App Store revenue. Once again, gaming apps account for approximately 70% of all App Store revenue. So the majority of that revenue comes from Fortnite and other games. And if you're going to provide those gamers, those customers, with an alternative to pay for these goods and services, perhaps incentivizing the customer to use an alternative method beside the App Store, this will be destructive to the growth and the bottom line of the iMob. For example, today on CNBC, the CEO of Match.com, the owner of Tinder, announced that this is a significant win for them because they will leave the option for customers to buy the subscription via the App Store, or you can use Tinder's method of payment and you're going to get a steep discount. Now, which one are you going to use? Are you going to pay the iMob or are you going to get the discount? After all, you're paying $20 a month to use Tinder, and after a month of using the app, total jerk off, no matches at all, besides the 2 women who matched with you only to bully you and then unmatched you anyways. I'd take the discount for that kind of experience. And by the way, what is the iMob's response to this ruling? Here's Josh Lipton from CNBC.
Wait, Josh, what do we know?
Yeah, Scott, we did just get that statement from Apple. Let me give it to you. Apple saying the App Store is not in violation of antitrust law. Company saying it remains committed to ensuring the App Store is a safe and trusted marketplace that supports a thriving developer community. So obviously, Scott, this is a historic high-profile antitrust fight between Apple and Epic. The judge here saying that Apple is issuing a decision where Apple won 9 of 10 counts. She said Apple was not a monopolist. Success is not illegal. She says the court cannot ultimately conclude that Apple is a monopolist under either federal or state antitrust laws. But she did say that Apple does engage in anti-competitive conduct. It's going to be forced to change its App Store policy. Specifically, Scott, she says she's ordering an injunction that says Apple will no longer be allowed to prohibit developers from offering links that direct users away from Apple's in-app purchasing system. It will remain to be seen if this does become a rule. One open question there investors will have to think about, even if given the opportunity to use an alternative payment system, how many consumers, Scott, will ultimately take advantage of that? Back to you.
So the mob, of course, denies we did not do anything wrong. We're not a monopoly. We should not be punished for our racketeering operation, yada, yada, yada. Of course, Epic Games are appealing the ruling, and it's going to go on and on and on. But what changed right now is you and I are able to use alternative methods to pay for apps circumventing the iMob. And of course, poor Josh Lipton, he's used to doing this. You know why? Because Tim Apple likes his ass kissed. Otherwise, he's not going to give you an interview. And poor Josh, perhaps sending a secret message, help me please, by growing that mustache to cover his lips. Mr. Apple, I cannot kiss your ass anymore. But of course, Tim Apple, the capo di capi, will never get tired of getting his ass kissed. And tomorrow, we have the big day, the California streaming, I believe, whatever that is, where the iMob will conduct a rescue operation for the stock by announcing new innovations? No, I'm kidding. The typical iPhone being upgraded with a slightly better camera, slightly better resolution, slightly better feeling. But you know what the innovation is? The big one. This is the reveal. The iMob will announce new colors. Oh, that's the one. That's the one we've been waiting for. New colors. That's how the iMob innovates these days, because they don't have to. They have the shakedown revenue. They don't need to innovate anymore. And by the way, California streaming, what does that mean? It means that the iMob will announce a lot of streaming content. New shows. Oh, that's the one, right? It's going to push Apple stock to the moon. New shows, which Netflix, by the way, been doing for years and years and years. But let's hope that we're going to have some decent mob shows, right? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see what happens with the iMob event. But for now, I'm signing off. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This is all I got for you for now, but I will talk to you again tomorrow.